Before there were Joy-Cons, before there were Wiimotes, there's a whole lot of other crap that Nintendo used to release. Today on... Welcome everybody to another episode of Press B to Cancel, a retro game podcast for your ear holes. I am Sick Jake, this week's co-host, but not alone. No, sir. I am joined by my friend, Werewolf. How you doing, sir?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Hey, can't complain. Actually, really excited to talk about today's episode. We're going to be looking at 16-bit accessories, right? We were talking a little bit about the show 16-bit accessories, but really we're talking about Super Nintendo and Genesis, peripherals and add-ons and stuff. Because I think we said TurboGrafx doesn't count.
TurboGrafx is technically, I think that's more 8-bit than 16-bit. I know it says TurboGrafx 16, but pretty sure it was two 8-bit processors is what happened.
Yeah,
they were doing Jaguar math there.
And honestly, I don't know, outside of the TG16 CD add-on, I don't know what else qualifies for them. I just don't think of them as an accessory-based system, right? Not like Nintendo and Genesis were doing at the time.
Yeah, the only accessory I can think of for that is the multi-tap that you absolutely needed to play any more than one player.
Well, right. Yeah, that's true, because Keith's Courage, I think it was a 5-player game, if I'm not wrong, and you need a multi-tap for that one.
Not Keith's Courage. Ordine was.
Was it? What was it
Yes.
then? Not Keith's Courage. There's like some kind of 5-player dungeon crawling game, if I remember, that used one.
I'm not familiar with that, but I only had 4 games for my TurboGrafx.
Okay.
Anyway,
it doesn't count. It's an 8-bit machine. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. So we're gonna look at accessories for both, SNES and Sega Genesis, and go from there. And there's actually, researching this episode, more than I thought, or at least more than I remember being for those systems. So let's be good. What do you want to start with first?
Well, let me check my notes here. The first thing that comes to mind for me when I think of 16-bit accessories, honestly, for me, Super Scope.
Okay.
That's the first, and I never had one. I borrowed one once, but I never had one. Somehow, at some point, and it's not from the one I borrowed because I returned all of that. I happened upon one years later in my stuff. All I had was the receiver for the Super Scope. I didn't actually have the scope.
So that we got to talk about this too, because the Super Scope needed like 6 AA batteries or something ridiculous. And for years, I never understood why. Because the Zapper, of course, didn't need any batteries. I mean, yes, it was plugged in, but what does this thing need batteries for if it's just a remote? Why does it need 6? But I guess it is an IR-based shooter, light gun thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. I didn't realize the purpose of the batteries, I guess.
So, for those who don't recall, this was just a wireless. This is just a light gun. That's all it is. It's just super fancy looking. It's got the little scope, and it came with the Super Scope 6 games. And honestly, I looked into it. This game was only supported by 12 games.
That's more than I thought, actually, because when I'm thinking Super Scope games, it's the Pac-In, Yoshi Safari, and the robot one. That's the only ones I know of. Battle Clash, yeah, exactly. What else was there that supported this thing?
I believe there was Yoshi Safari.
Yeah.
There was another one that I thought was kind of funny. I looked into this. I went down a rabbit hole on this one, and I found it was supported by a racing game called Lamborghini American Challenge.
A driving game supported the Super Scope.
A driving game
for what?
Support Super Scope.
Like, not the drive.
There's 2 ways to play with the Super Scope. There's single player or 2-player. If you play single player, you use the scope. The game drives itself with AI, and you're shooting the other racers to try and get in the lead. So it turns it into like semi F-Zero kind of thing. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
The game looks like Rad Racer or Top Gear, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So it's not Road Blasters by any means. It's literally a Lamborghini licensed racing game.
So it's a driving game, but with a Super Scope, you can also turn into like a racing shooter hybrid game.
Right.
So without the scope,
so you're shooting the cars up ahead to
Right.
work your way up in front.
So if you don't have a
And
scope, is it still a driving shooting game or just a straight driving game?
just straight driving game.
That's that makes no sense. That's bizarre.
So yeah, like if for 2-player, one person is driving and one
Right.
person is shooting. So
I mean, just the
I
value you get with this accessory. So many games
right.
to choose from.
How did that happen? But we never got a Mad Max game in that vein on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
That's
You
what I want
imagine?
to know.
Yeah. I'd totally go
That
for a
that
Mad Max
actually
game.
would have been rad. That would have been a great thing for Nintendo to get behind. Look, Mad Max driving game. Boom. Sell all
Just
the things.
add in some
Yeah,
Tina Turner and you got a game, man. Seriously.
right?
That's so weird. It's like taking look, we got this baseball game, but if you plug in a super scope, you can shoot the other players. It's just so random. What a bizarre concept. So okay, so Yoshi Safari, Battle Clash, a Lamborghini racing game. That's 4 of the dozen that we got. Was there anything
I
else?
think Terminator 2 was one of them that supported it.
Okay, that's good.
Um, what was did Area 50 not Area 51. What was that Aerosmith arcade game? Did
Oh,
that
Revolution
support it?
X? Was that on the
Yeah,
SNES?
Revolution
No.
X. Revolution X was on the SNES
Was it
because
really?
in my research, it's supported by the mouse.
Wow. We'll get to the mouse later because that's interesting. I'm just looking at my Mind Palace here about Super Scope games because now I didn't realize it was 12 games. That's a lot. I'm glad because the problem with accessories, and this goes for both systems, is you're always leery of buying an accessory that may only have support for like 3 games, right? It's always frustrating.
Yeah, so it was supported by a game called Bazooka Blitzkrieg, which has no Wikipedia entry apparently.
A
The Hunt
classic.
for Red October, which was just bonus games for that one.
Okay.
Lemmings 2. So
Whoa, okay.
apparently that's 2-player mode only, a 2-player co-op. I don't know how that works.
You're shooting lemmings to blow them up, maybe? Is that what it's for?
I don't know. Like the goal is to keep the lemmings alive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's supposed to be keeping them alive, not shooting them. I mean, it's fun to blow them up for fun, but I wouldn't plug in a super scope and get a pack of batteries to do so. That's a weird one.
Yeah. So there's Metal Combat Falcon's Revenge, which is a sequel to Battle Clash.
Okay.
So interesting that Battle Clash did well enough to get a sequel.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. That's good.
So it was Terminator 2, the arcade game that supported it, Operation Thunderbolt, Tin Star, and X Zone. So it
Interesting.
wasn't Revolution X, it was X Zone.
But Revolution X gets mouse support. that's
Yeah.
that's the way to go.
A number of
Interesting.
those games that supported the Super Scope apparently also supported the light gun functionality because so did Lamborghini, or not the mouse functionality. Um, Lamborghini American
Right.
Challenge you can do with the Super Scope or the mouse for the shooting mode.
I gotta try this because I know I can use an emulator. I think the Mister takes a mouse for like an actual USB mouse as a SNES mouse. I'll have to try that. I'll have to try Lamborghini just for that mode. That's hilarious. That's even
Yeah.
an option. What a weird thing. So I didn't own one of these either. A friend of mine did. He had all these toys, and all we ever played was the 6-1 package. And to be honest, I remember very little of it. I like the idea of light guns in games, but it just feels like all the good ones are arcade games that are not on the home consoles, I guess.
So I've played Battle Clash. I didn't much care for the Super Scope 6 cartridge. There wasn't it felt like a fancy tech demo.
Right.
But Battle Clash was a quality game and it was a
Okay.
lot of fun. And I think I beat it in one sitting, but that sitting was about 3 hours.
I mean, for the you know what? For a light gun game, that's a good amount. But I don't
Yeah,
know if because that's only a Super Scope game. You can't play that with a controller, right?
right.
So I mean, I don't know if I, as a kid, would have liked paying full price for a SNES game that I only got 3 hours out of. But I mean, I've played
To be
worse, I guess.
fair, I went back and played it, I want to say 3 times over the course of that week
Oh,
after I
okay.
had beaten it. So I want to say I probably beat it 2 or 3 times. One of the times I came close and got a game over at the end and was just done.
Right.
But it was a fun game. I liked that one. So the Super Scope, kind of an underrated release, in my opinion. There were some quality games for it, but I think they just kind of got buried by Nintendo's advertising of it comes with 6 games, and then there was
Yeah.
Yoshi's Safari and Battle Clash, and between those 3, Battle Clash is the only one I ever found any interest in.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely more of a the appearance, the idea of this as an accessory is more fun than actually I think using it, which is unfortunate. Like it's
Yeah.
I love the Zapper on the NES, and this is just an extension of that and a much cooler form factor. But as a kid, the need for the batteries would probably drive my mother nuts. There's so few games for it. I don't know.
When I was doing my research on this thing, I had completely forgotten that they used this as the Devo gun in Super Mario Brothers the movie.
Yeah, you
They
mentioned
painted
that.
it black and made it the Devo guns.
Yeah, no, that's clear. Awesome. I want to say too that was it Kingdom Battle, the Rabbids Mario crossover game. I believe Peach uses a Super Scope as well. I think so.
Oh,
There's definitely
cool.
this is an Easter egg in a few different things. Nintendo definitely clearly realizes, successful or not, that this is a part of their history, and they try and sneak in Easter eggs with it, which is cool.
Yeah.
Do we want to mention the Menacer? Do I have a screenshot of that one? I do.
The Sega Menacer. It just looked
Which,
like an incomplete Super Scope.
like, in a world where everything Genesis is black, why the hell is this thing gray like a Super Scope? Why?
You know
Just to
what?
trick kids to
It
buy it?
I don't think so. It came out in '92, and I think that was around the time when toy guns were started to being made colorful
Yeah,
and obviously not a real gun.
yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that was a conscious decision to not make it all black so it didn't look as menacing as something called the Menacer should.
No, you know what? 100%. That's got to be what it is. You're right. Because yeah, you could. There's a time where you couldn't get any Capcoms that were black anymore, and
Right.
the I don't know if I have a picture of it, but the light gun that I know a lot of people liked was the Justifier for Lethal Enforcers that you can get for home consoles, and that thing was bright pink and bright blue for the same reason, and so same idea. Yeah, I figured I'd put the Minister on this list, but like I remember there's a Toe
The
Jam and Earl tomato game that used the damn thing. Other than that, I have no idea. I think it had less support than the Super Scope.
it only had 9 games.
That, again, more than I expected for the Menacer. I did not think there'd be that many for it. That's wild to me. That's crazy.
All right. Well, since we've talked about the mouse, I guess we should move on to the mouse. And
Okay.
this is another device that, both Nintendo and Sega each had their own.
Oh, Genesis
Um,
had one as well? I didn't know that.
Genesis
Oh,
had one. It
interesting.
was called the Mega Mouse.
Of course. So the SNES mouse,
Um,
I got to use quite a bit at a friend's place. It got to the point where when I would visit, he would hide it on me because I kept wanting to play Mario Paint with the damn thing. I loved Mario Paint as a kid, and it was mostly because I got to use this mouse.
mhm. Yeah, I think I only sold my Mario Paint sometime last year or the year before. I had it from when I was a kid up until recently, and I was like, I don't think I'm gonna play with my Mario Paint anymore. I got Photoshop and Ace Sprite and
Yeah.
cool
Well,
idea, not my thing anymore.
well, for the time
But
though, like you said, Photoshop and Sprite, yeah, definitely,
dude,
capable
I
software.
had
But back then we had none of this stuff, right?
I had a friend, his whole family was super into playing with their Mario Paint and making they actually went through the trouble of composing uh what did they animate? I want to say they animated um a whole cartoon starring Yoshi.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, because it had
And
the
they
animation to
actually
a
sort
degree.
of yeah, and they figured out how to implement music from I want to say Mario World somehow and made this
Hmm.
whole cartoon that they animated using Mario Paint and transferred it to a VHS. So it was
Oh,
a
wow.
long, painstaking process of you animate a segment, record it,
Yeah,
delete it, animate a new segment, record it, delete it, and so forth.
it is stitched
And
together. Huh.
Yeah, and that's pretty rad. It was two brothers and their dad, and their dad was surprisingly supportive of that kind of thing, because I don't want to say something that sounds like he was one of those guys. He gets home from work on the construction site and cracks open some beers.
Yeah.
So
Long
the
ass
fact
day.
that he
Yeah.
was like, yeah. So the fact that he had the energy and the willpower to help his kids with this and figure that stuff out,
Yeah.
that's that's amazing. Like for any dad, but when you work something that physically intensive, to be that tired when you get home from work and still, yeah, let's do this, guys. That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's like nowadays, that's pretty common, right? Kids are into the idea of making videos for YouTube and whatnot. Like my daughter likes playing with some pixel programs she likes to use to make sprites. She knows how to do some basic animations with it. She knows how to pull music to put it with the videos, and she always tells me, I want to put it on YouTube someday. And I'm like, okay. But back in the 80s or 90s, I guess, for this thing, the concept of video editing was a hell of a lot harder to do, right? And it's so
Yeah.
wild that you had something like Mario Paint, which had all three components. You had animation in there to a degree. It had music, which is what I used to use a lot of, and then it had the painting program. Plus, it had the fun mini game as well. Really, like honestly, out of all accessories, if this only had one game supported, Mario Paint, I would have been happy with this as an accessory. I think for me, and you got it with the Mario Paint, but it had a bunch of games as well too.
Yeah, I would have thought this had less support than the Super Scope, but it had way more.
Yeah,
Apparently, there were like 50 to 70 games or something. I couldn't find a complete list anywhere that said what games used it, but all the lists had tons and tons of games.
yeah.
So it had a big library of support. I was really surprised.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one. It was a trackball mouse too, right? Had to have been trackball back then.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You had to pull the bottom thing off and scrape dirt off of the little rollers
yeah.
inside the mouse to keep it clean.
That's
So
wild.
it was, fortunately, it had its own plastic mouse pad, so mostly what got in there was grimy and you could peel it off pretty easily
Right.
instead of just being dirt and dust clogging it up.
Yeah, I remember doing the revolve mouse all the time and cleaning it out, and just you don't have that problem anymore. It's just a different time.
Yeah, right?
Try and explain that to my kids. They don't understand the concept of something so analog in a device.
Mhm.
I love it.
And I think Doom supported the mouse, which makes me curious how you would move forward
Hmm.
and backward.
You must have like left
In
hand on the
Doom.
controller pad or something. Has to be, right?
That's all I can figure is like left hand on a controller, right hand on the mouse. They must have
Right.
done something like that.
The Doom
But
was
yeah, it was
ones where it
supported
was
by
just
that.
there's no looking up and down in Doom, right? So it just would have been left and right, I think.
Right. So maybe no, it didn't have looking up and down. So maybe moving
Yeah.
the mouse forward and backwards just moved you forward or backward.
Oh.
And so
Oh, that would have
maybe there was
yeah.
no strafing. Maybe it was literally forward, backward, turn left, turn right,
Right.
shoot, and something else. I don't know.
Huh.
Unless
Okay.
holding one of the buttons maybe made you strafe when you went left or right.
I got to check
I
that out because
guess
that
there's a
sounds
possible
interesting.
control scheme there. Or no, it probably made you swap weapons, honestly. So
Yeah, it had to
yeah.
be weapon swap
But I
because
guess you
there's no
could
wheel on
control the
this one.
entirety of Doom with just the mouse. Yeah, right. It's just
Yeah.
two buttons and the ball.
Hmm.
Super Noah's Ark made use of it.
Oh, that's yeah, the Doom clone. Yeah, classic.
Yeah. And then, there were some other art programs besides Mario Paint. There was Acme Animation Factory. I think I rented that one once.
Okay,
It was not as good as Mario Paint,
right.
but
And
it
like Mario Paint's
was
animation
a fair
was
shake.
very very short, like are very not very complicated. Like you only got like what 8 frames of animation, I think.
You got, was it 3, 6, or 9, I believe.
Right, but then smaller
And
sections
depending,
of area.
right, if it was 3 frames, it was a big ass sprite.
Yeah.
And if it was 9 frames, it was a little bitty sprite. So,
Okay.
but they made it work.
Yeah. No, I was pretty impressed with this one. I think this is like a great accessory for the SNES. This is one I would. I mean, I'd have no use for it now. Like you said, you sold yours even, and that's a point, right? It's a
Yeah.
ball mouse that's easily reproducible with the USB mouse and emulators these days. But what a cool thing to have in the 90s, right? Like I never had a computer until I was basically 18. So this would be like my first
Same.
computer-like exposure with a mouse.
Yeah, I got Mario Paint when I was 12, and I didn't get a PC until I was 16 or 17. So,
Yeah, that's cool. All right, this is a good one. And the Genesis
and
one too.
then the
Wild.
Genesis had the Mega Mouse, and that one that one had some art games too. There was like a Sonic art game, and I think one or two others. But there was also one that really caught me off guard. Marble Madness for the Genesis supported the mouse, and that
Oh,
would
gross.
probably work really well.
Oh, you think
Well,
so? I
because it
don't
was a
know.
trackball game in the arcades.
Yeah, but there's a difference between. Well, you know what? The only difference in the arcades is an upside down mouse. You're right. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Trying to scroll with your hand across a desk, that sounds really hard. Because that game is famous
Yeah.
for having weird controls.
So I
Marble
don't know how
Madness.
well that would work, but it seemed I thought that was interesting that that was a game that supported it.
I wonder if was it Herzog Zooey, the retail real time strategy game. I wonder if that had support for it, or General Chaos
I
would be another one.
don't know.
Now I'm kind of curious.
Cannon
That's
Fodder
interesting.
supported the mice. If you remember Cannon Fodder, that was originally an Amiga game.
Cannon Fodder. I don't know if I played that one. Let me
It
see.
was a weird little overhead shooter where you have little army, like a little platoon of dudes, like 2 or 3 guys running around, and you lead them through the jungle or the forest or
Oh,
wherever you happen to be and target where they're gonna shoot. You can play it with a controller, but you can
yeah.
also play it with the mouse.
I have not played that game, but that game looks really interesting.
Yeah, it
The
looked
Because
kinda
the
neat.
Genesis was
I
great
was
for strategy games, right?
Yeah, okay, so Nobunaga's Ambition used the mouse on the Genesis. I do remember that one. I didn't make a note of it, but yeah, there were a number of the strategy games on the Genesis made use of the mouse,
Yeah, because I think there was
which
I think
totally
there's a
makes
Dune.
sense.
I think Dune was on the Genesis at one point. I think it was Dune. And you know, all these games I need to go back and try now.
I
Like,
thought I thought Dune was 32X,
no, I don't
which
think
is
so.
hmm,
No, Dune and Dune 2 were on Genesis.
huh.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Genesis. Interesting. Yeah, because I
All
remember
right.
renting it, and because I rented it, it was years later. I actually bought Dune 2000 because I remember playing Genesis version of Dune and loving that game so much. It's one of my favorite strategy games. So I mean, I didn't even realize there was a mouse for the Genesis. That's something I'm gonna have to check out.
Wild.
Wild. Yeah, the mouse for a home console is just. I love that kind of stuff. It's up there with like Dreamcast getting a keyboard. It's just like merging the two together. I love that stuff.
I still have my Dreamcast keyboard.
Do you?
I do.
Yeah, get an adapter. You can use it on your computer, man. It totally work.
Well, I have my GameCube keyboard right here. I have it plugged into my RetroPie. Because that one came with the adapter for USB to GameCube.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
So I just leave the adapter in the drawer and I have it hooked up to my RetroPie because I didn't want to buy another keyboard just for the RetroPie.
that's wild. Okay, all right. What else
All
we
right.
got?
There's the Super Game Boy, which we cannot
Yes.
ignore.
No, absolutely not.
It's it's weird that it's an accessory for the Super Nintendo. Honestly, this was the first way I ever played Game Boy games on my
Really?
own.
Okay.
Like I owned this before I owned a Game Boy.
Okay. So I never
Um,
owned this one, but my friend did, and but I was the original Game Boy owner, and I love it. But like I love this because today, Mister Retro Arch emulation, it's not hard these days to play Game Boy games on a big screen TV. But in the '90s, I never even dreamed of playing like Donkey Kong 94 on a TV. But if you had the Super Game Boy, it totally works, and you don't have to worry about batteries. Like this is an amazing device.
this is how I played Pokemon the first time through.
Oh, well, wild. Okay.
Pokemon Blue, Super Game Boy. I didn't get a Game Boy Pocket until I want to say that summer. You know what? I might have gotten it just before the Pokemon Blue came out, but I did get a Game Boy Pocket that summer, like the same year that Pokemon came out. So that was when I got a Game Boy. But I had the Super Game Boy for a couple years before that.
Okay.
So I played Mario's Picross on this thing.
What a weird game to want to play on a big screen TV. I'm thinking like, Mario Land and, maybe a Tetris.
Mario's Picross was my first Game Boy game.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I never did play that
I bought it off
one.
a friend because I had a Super Game Boy that I had just picked up. Like, oh, now I can start getting Game Boy games. And I borrowed Picross from a friend, and I loved it. And he was like, "You can have it for $20." And I was like, "Yeah."
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's wild to me. I think for me, it was Donkey Kong 94 played on this. And if I'm not wrong, this thing, you had a different color palette for certain games. And Donkey Kong 94 was one of those games that had a special palette with this. Like, it's still Game Boy color palette, but it looked different with this device.
Right.
And I think you got different borders too.
Yeah, it could play all game. I want to say almost all Game Boy games. There might have been one or two it couldn't.
Yeah.
What I was reading said it was almost universal, and
Yeah.
then it could play Game Boy Color games as long as they had a Game Boy mode.
Right.
So the few Game Boy Color games that were backwards compatible, it could play.
Yeah. But like I know there were some games, I think Metroid 2, I want to say Maryland had one as well. There's a few Game Boy games that had special Super Game Boy color palettes that was built into the device. And as neat as this was,
And
did you ever hear about this one? The second one. There's a Super Game Boy 2.
I have heard of it.
Yeah.
What is the difference? I used to know and I forgot because I didn't I didn't retain the information, honestly. I looked into it a couple years ago.
Well, we never got it over here, right? This is, I think, it was Japan only thing.
Japan
I think
only,
it was. So yeah, that's why I was looking at my phone here. So if people watching the video, I'm looking down. I'm paying attention, man. I'm just doing my research or checking my Mind Palace.
Yeah, if you see me keep looking over here, it's because this is where my notes are.
Yes, exactly. Higher clock speed is the main difference. So better performance for certain Game Boy games.
Okay.
Different borders from the original Game Boy, Super Game Boy 1, because some games had extra borders on the sides. This is different. It also had a built-in 2-player mode. Also had a Game Link port built in. So it had the Game Link port built in for 2-player support. I think that's what, for Pokemon trading and stuff?
Yeah,
so I guess that's
you
interesting.
could like use your same Super Game Boy to trade to your Game Boy or your friend's Game Boy or whatever.
Yeah, so
Okay,
that's interesting.
Kind of cool. Or
But
Tetris LAN parties.
Of course, yes, famous Tetris LAN parties. Who could forget those days? Honestly, I never had a link cable. I never had much interest in it for this, but it's something that for later on the Nintendo techs, right? If you want to play Zelda 4 Swords properly on the GameCube, you need the Game Boys with the cables. And it was just crazy. But no, when we were talking accessories, I forgot about the Super Game Boy until you mentioned it, and it's a solid device. Like, what a great thing to be able to play portable games on TV. And like I said, Pokemon. Playing Pokemon this, I could totally see it. Like as much as I like Pokemon, for a role-playing game, it's kind of tough to play on a small little screen. But to play on the big screen would be really cool.
Pokemon had the benefit of all the towns, most of the towns have a color name to them, right?
Right.
So you get to Cerulean, and the city is all shades of cerulean. And you get to Pewter, and it's all shades of gray. When you're wandering the routes, it's usually green. If you go in the caves, it's brown.
Oh, it did that?
So it did.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's actually really interesting.
Depending on where you were, the palette would automatically shift to match the region, which was a super cool little thing. Like, it was something that I got playing it on Super Game Boy that I would not have gotten had I only played it on the Game Boy. And that was a nice little touch.
I'm pretty impressed with that.
It probably made playing a Game Boy game on my TV a little more bearable.
Well, that's the thing. Even today, when I watch streamers play Game Boy games, I can't watch it unless they're using the green and yellow spinach color palette. If they don't have that color palette, it's hard for me to watch. I don't like the black and white because that's not Game Boy to me.
Weird.
Well, because I grew up with the original Game Boy, and that's the color it was, right? The Game Boy Pocket changed the colors a bit, and it's just not the same to me. So it's something like that. This is also one of the few games or systems on the Mister where I'll turn on the filters for the grid lines, right? The scan lines on a Game Boy, so I get those pixels showing. It's just one of those weird things where I'm just so used to seeing the pixels of the Game Boy, and if it's not there, I get upset. It bugs me. But I guess we didn't have any of that stuff on the Super Game Boy. There was no filters on the Game Boy or Super Game Boy.
Mm.
That's pretty wild, though. It's a fantastic accessory. This is great, and I heard nothing but good things about the second one. It's always weird to me they didn't release the second Game Boy, Super Game Boy here.
The original Game Boy might not have sold well, or Super Game Boy may not have sold well enough, and I'm pretty sure the actual handhelds were selling pretty well over here.
Yeah, and
And
you know
it,
what? Nintendo was probably there's what 3 iterations of Game Boys over here, right? You had the original, the Pocket, and then the Color, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So maybe I guess just constantly selling those systems, people were just happy buying those and not this.
and then eventually they also did what, the Game Boy Light,
The Game Boy
which
Light
was
was
the
it the Game Boy?
little tiny one. It was itty bitty, like the cartridge stuck out of it,
Really?
but it was backlit and it was shaped like an NES controller basically as far as the shape. So it had the D-pad on the left side and the buttons on the right side and the
Interesting.
screen in the middle. And
I know there's
it was like
the
a bar.
I know there's a GBA Mini. Like it's a belt buckle styles Game Boy Advance. I don't know about the Game Boy, a small Game Boy though. I'll have to look into that. I'm actually looking at like I kind of want to get a Game Boy today. I've seen a lot of people doing mods of their Game Boys to have backlit screens and that kind of thing. So I was kind of thinking I might do a Game Boy build. I would do a backlit screen, and I'd probably have to get an EverDrive, but those things are pricey. But I don't know.
Was it
I really love the Game Boy, like quite a bit. I mean, if I had an original SNES, I would definitely own this accessory today. I think it's fantastic.
Okay, so it wasn't called Game Boy Light, it was called Game Boy Micro.
Okay, and that
And
was the
it
original Game
looked
Boy.
like a yeah, it was an original Game Boy and it had a backlit
Huh.
screen and it looked like a very tiny Game Gear essentially.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
It was the same layout, just really small. And that, like, if you think an NES controller gives you a cramp playing,
Oh,
the Game Boy
yeah, no
Micro
doubt.
is ridiculous. You're like,
Oh, just like a Joy-Con then. Honestly,
yeah,
I don't get
it's
Nintendo's thing for small buttons. It drives me nuts.
it's very tiny.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know why they went so small with it. Like, okay, here's a picture of it that I'm looking at. It fits in this guy's hand with plenty of room. So it was
No.
a little thing for sure. It was probably maybe twice the size of a Game Boy cartridge as far as width goes, and then the same height.
Yeah, that's pretty cramped. I don't see it. At least with this thing, you're using a standard SNES controller to play games, and I think that would be pretty comfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. And there's nothing like this on the Genesis, as far as I know.
No, well, technically the power base converter,
Okay. Well, you know, let's switch to
which
that one then.
yeah, the power base converter launched with the Genesis, and
I
it
didn't realize
was
it
to
launched, but yeah.
yeah, it released at launch, and it was to make sure that people could still play their Master System games on the new hardware.
Right. So Master System
So
was
that
not
was the
portable, but I guess the same idea. You're plugging something into a console to play a different generation of games. And this, I see this
right.
did both the cards on, on SMS, but also the cards as well, which is interesting.
Yep. This is one of those things that I always kind of wanted just to have because I thought it was cool. And I've seen them in person. I've messed with them in person, but I I think I'm happy just having my original Master System instead.
I like how it has the pause button built into it as well, because that was one of the dumb things in this on this
Yeah,
Master System was the pause button, and this has that button, which is hilarious to me.
they didn't
Um,
rewire it to just use the start button on the Genesis
yeah,
controller. No, no, no.
no.
It's pause button.
You want that authentic Master System experience? Your ass gets off the couch, walks over to the system, and hits the pause button, and not start.
And
That's
what's
pretty wild.
funny is they actually had to redesign the power base converter for the Genesis Model 2 because the shape of the Model 1 version blocked the ports on the back of the Genesis 2.
I'm even surprised there was a second version at all, because the second version of the Genesis was years after release, right?
Mhm.
Because I remember my uncle went buying a Genesis, because he was playing mine a lot, and when he bought his own, it was a different style, and that was a few years after release. I'm just surprised the Master System had fans that far into the Genesis lifespan. Like, I like the Master System, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, but I think Genesis was a far better console. That's interesting. That's wild. Does this have
Well,
the FM audio built into it? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Because like I know there's some Master System games that take advantage of it, like Double Dragon, and I think I'm trying to think. I think you need a special thing for it. I'm now trying to remember, but I thought this had it. Give me a sec here to check our Mind Palaces.
Sorry. Wife called the kiddo on his tablet over there, and I don't want picking up too much background noise.
No problem. I'm just looking up my research. Hold on, in the Mind Palace. Does it have FM? Because for those who don't know, if anybody's played the Master System in an emulator, make sure you turn on FM on, because there's some pretty serious tunes coming out of some games. The Powerbase FM allows SMS cards to be played with FM sound on Genesis, so it does. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, this is a great thing. Like if you're a Sega fan back in the day, if you got shafted when your parents didn't buy you a Nintendo, then you probably have a lot of nostalgia for those systems, and this is a neat device. But I mean, like you said, you can buy a Sega Master System for peanuts nowadays.
Yeah, well, I've had my Master System for 20 years now, and I bought it off of my cousin who had it for probably 12 years before that. So
right.
The Master System I have is one I grew up playing, even though it wasn't mine; it was my cousin's.
Right,
but
that's still pretty cool.
Yeah, I used to love playing it at his house because I had the NES, he had the Master System, and then when the Genesis came out, we both got Genesis. And then Super Nintendo came out. He kind of stopped getting so much game stuff. I got the Super Nintendo. And then eventually he ended up getting an N64 and I didn't. So it was
back and forth. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of today if I would ever want one of these, but I think you're right. If I were a collector or something today, I would just want the Master System itself. I don't think I would buy this device.
This is one of those things that these days you'd probably want it to just have it like in the box and complete. And it's just a cool piece to have. It's not something that's going to get a ton of use. And then I guess this is a good segue for the no. Yeah. This is a good segue to go to the 32X because it's a very similar concept. But it enabled hardware to go the other way instead.
Yeah, I don't have a picture of this one, but we can talk about the 32X and the Sega CD by extension, I guess. They're accessories, but they're also like new consoles in a way. Like Sega was so damn weird with this, right?
Yeah. So 32X, for those unfamiliar, was an attempt to make the Genesis lifespan last longer and compete with incoming hardware that was more powerful than the 16-bit hardware.
Right.
Because this was around the time we were starting to we were hearing the murmurs of the PlayStation, and like we were getting CDI, which ooh boy, and what was the other one? 3DO.
Yes, which another one that just didn't go anywhere. Yeah. So many great consoles.
And, but we had Neo Geo was out. Like some people had that at home. I knew of a few. I never saw one in person.
Yeah.
And then what was the other? Oh, the Jaguar came out around that time too, I believe.
Trying to think. Yeah, because it was Jaguar came out like a year too early, I think, or maybe a year too too late, I guess, in the generation, because then you had Saturn and then you had PlayStation, so it was kind of a weird gap, and it was just not a great system. But yeah, I guess Sega was just trying to have something in between the generations of gaming, right? Just something out there. But there's so few titles for it. Like, I want to say there's more titles for the Super Scope on the SNES than there are for the 32X.
Quite possibly. There were not a lot of games. And then I think there was an even smaller subset of games that made use of the 32X and the Sega CD both.
Oh, yeah. It's got to be, a couple, like at most. It's weird. The only one I remember, the two I remember, I think there's a Star Wars game, which I have not played. And then, of course, it was the Sonic game, Sonic Chaotix, which is the one everybody's like, oh, it looks so great. But gameplay-wise, it was not that fantastic. Like, I know with the Mister, right? The to make a core for the Mister is quite labor intensive. Like, it's a lot of work for these guys to do it. And I always laugh when I see people hounding core developers saying, "Hey, well, why don't you do CPS3 from the arcades for Street Fighter 3?" It's because it's a lot of work, and there's only like 4 games for the CPS3. There's not a lot of effort. And the 32X, people are asking for the 32X, and like, I'd like to see it someday. But all that work for how many games? Like 7? Is there even 10 games of this thing?
All
It's a
right.
lot of
Well,
work.
the Sega Mega CD 32X had 6 games, and one of them is Brazil only. Believe it or
6
not,
games.
Night Trap is one of them.
They use the 32X?
Yeah, 32X CD.
How does that work? Is it a
Um,
cartridge and a CD, or just a CD that taps into the cartridge, the 32X's hardware?
I honestly don't know. But the actual 32X, it looks like had probably 3 dozen games.
Oh, well, you know what? That's not so bad then. I don't know if it's worth the
Blackthorn
cost
was
of the
one of them.
device. So, so you know why I got confused with this? Is Blackthorn was also on the Genesis and Super Nintendo, I think. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a 32X port. So I wonder how many of
Yeah.
these games were unique to the 32X and how many were ports.
Um, well, I know Knuckles Chaotix was unique to it,
Yes.
but that game was not very good.
No. Unfortunately, and that's like, I love me some Sonic games, but yeah.
But oh, Virtual Racing was probably no, that one wasn't unique to it because you could also buy that for the Genesis
Yeah, I owned it, or
standalone.
I
And
played
that
it a
one, I
lot.
believe that one for the Genesis had a chip inside of it to make it more powerful. So it was like $100 game instead of the usual 60.
Yeah, I can't remember if I bought it used or if I rented it, but I played it a lot in the arcades and at home, and it was an expensive cart. I think I did own it. It's fantastic. I love Virtual Racing. It maybe doesn't hold up as well now, and if you're going to play it now, you'd probably just play the arcade on emulation. But for the Genesis, that's pretty impressive. Like, that's up there with Star Fox. I guess the 32X version's
Yeah,
probably got better frame rate. I'm just kind of skimming
very
through the
likely,
list.
yeah. However, the 32X had a couple of issues. One is early on, the first releases of it actually made use of the expansion port that the Sega CD makes use of.
Okay.
So you'd only have one or the other, not both.
Oh, that's not good.
Like if you yeah, you'd have to unhook one to use the other, which I mean it's not that big an issue because you can honestly just slide it off of the CD, plug in the piece, and then snap in the cartridge slot and you're good to go. But
Yeah.
it's still that's a lot of work to just play something on the same platform.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody's going to do that. That seems to be a pain. That seems to be a weird thing. It's like, you think there would be a way to have like a pass-through cable or something to make that
Yeah,
easier to do.
later versions stopped making use of the expansion port and put it all in the cartridge slot.
Right. Because the thing,
However,
go ahead.
there were also issues with the 32X actually causing the Genesis motherboard to get fried.
No, really?
It would overheat it and melt it, and then the Genesis was useless.
I never heard of that. That's like early Red Ring of Death. That would be
I've
wild.
only heard of it a couple of times, but I actually met someone who had that issue.
That'd be a
And I was
nightmare
like,
for
that
me.
sucks.
I just look at the 32X and I kind of say to myself, like, if as a kid you would buy this thinking that this was the future of Genesis games and that you'd only exclusively be buying 32X cartridges for the next couple of years. But that was definitely not the case when there's only 30 so games for the damn thing, and you're still buying
Yeah, well,
Genesis games.
I'm pretty sure Sega of America, more specifically Tom Kalinske, but probably most of the heads of Sega of America, were totally against the 32X
Yeah,
because it divides the market going into the 32-bit market with the Saturn and the PlayStation and all that.
yeah,
You don't want to split your your market share even further because then you're and I mean that's what happened. A lot of people didn't buy the Saturn because they felt burned by the 32X.
yeah. I mean, I remember as a kid looking at the catalog at Christmas, and the one year it was a Sega CD. I'm like, oh, I wish I could get that. And then a year or so later it was a 32X. Like, well, I could get all three. And then you see the Saturn, and it's just kind of like, you're done with the Genesis. You don't want to look at any of the Sega stuff anymore. I mean, I
Yeah.
was
So
done with the consoles till Dreamcast.
the Sega CD hit North America in '92. It originally released in Japan in 91. The 32X came out in 94, so there
Yeah.
was at least a couple years there. But
Yeah.
then and I think the 32X came out late 94. And then Saturn released middle of 95. 6
Yeah.
months earlier than everybody was expecting, and which hurt the sales. It was bad.
Yeah.
So the 32X was just a bad call all around.
Yeah.
It was cool idea, but with development of brand new hardware in the works, they shouldn't have. It was
Yeah.
wasted money on R&D, it was
Yeah.
wasted time on R&D, wasted resources. It was just 32X should not have happened. Sega CD I can forgive because that's more in line with like the Turbo CD.
Right.
It was early enough in the lifespan to where it extended what the system could do for a period of time that
Well, and it also
meant
brought CD
something to
audio to
gamers.
games, right? And CD audio is
Right.
huge for home console games. 32X is still carts, so what's the point? I mean, faster processor, I guess, maybe more sprites. I look at 32X games and they look great. They can look good, but is it worth paying for an add-on when you can just play the Genesis versions of the games? I don't think it makes a difference. I just don't
Yeah.
see the Sega CD. You're right. I could forgive that. I could see why that exists. The 32X, I don't buy it.
But speaking of that, the Virtua Racing game that actually had the chip implanted in it that made it do more, that was akin to kind of like what Super Nintendo did with Star Fox and I
The
want to say
FX,
Mega
yeah,
Man X2. Yeah, the FX chip. But Virtua Racing, like the chip that they put in these Genesis cartridges was leaps and bounds above what the FX chip could do.
yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure Virtua Racing looked far better than anything the FX chip made use of.
It was also faster frame rates, right? Like as neat as Star Fox is, and like Stunt Race FX and all those that use that chip, they're all to me feel really slow and really low in frames.
Yeah,
Virtual
they're
Racing,
fun, but the
yeah,
frame rate is terrible.
Virtual Racing is a very smooth game and plays amazingly well. There's only 3 tracks, which is not a lot, but it plays really well for what it is.
Hmm. But I mean, I guess that's only technically it's not really an accessory so much as it was an altered hardware, but I mean
Yeah.
it's not super tangential. It's only slightly tangential, so I feel like it fits. I
Well,
wanted to mention that.
do we want to switch to other on cartridge accessories then?
Um well, if you're going to talk about what I'm thinking you're talking about from Codemasters,
Yeah.
uh I think it's worth talking about what the reason that came about first.
Okay. Sure. What do you want to start with then?
So, the multi-tap
Okay.
in general, just the multi-tap. Super Nintendo had one, Genesis had two.
Well, Super Nintendo had 2 as well, right? I think.
Yeah, but they were all like the Super Nintendo ones all worked with any other game, period. And that was the nice thing about it.
Right.
If you bought a multi-tap for Super Nintendo, it worked with any game that made use of more than two players. Period, the
Okay.
end. Whereas there was a big issue with the multi-tap on the Genesis because Sega's Team Player and EA's four-way play were competing. And so if it made use of one, it generally didn't make use of the other.
That's wild to me.
And
But that's
it
interesting
would
though, and I can see it because EA was one of those companies that did their best to override how Sega's cartridges were manufactured. They had their own manufacturing process for Genesis carts, and they had a big battle
yeah,
for a while about it. That's why the Genesis or the EA Genesis carts had that yellow tab on them. It's because it's done by themselves. They didn't go to Sega for their manufacturing.
right. So that I mean that was pretty cool that EA gave Sega some guff and to where they couldn't just completely control the market like that the
Yeah,
way Nintendo did. And I mean, EA successfully pulled what Tengen tried to do on the NES and completely failed at.
yeah. EA
And
got away with it,
EA,
right?
yeah, well, EA did it legally. And I
Yeah,
mean, I know nowadays we look at EA and we're like, "Oh, you pieces of shit, you garbage," But back then, EA really was like it was they were pushing boundaries constantly. It was like they were EA and Sega were like the Wild West of the gaming industry back then, and putting them together it was a shit show, but in the best possible way for consumers, and except for this multi-tap conundrum. So
Yeah.
the team player and the four-way play, if game worked with one, it didn't work with the other. Generally, if it was an EA game, it worked with the four-way play. If it
Right.
wasn't an EA game, it worked with the team player and not the four-way play. So that was the mess. And
That's
so
wild.
people complained to Sega. So going forward, the team player actually worked with both games. Like
Okay.
both it was compatible with both game formats, I guess.
It's
But
wild. So if
then
you were a sports
later,
fan of EA, then you would want the EA one because like the EA is famous for all the sports games on Genesis, right? There's a lot of fond memories of
right.
those. I didn't even realize that they were not incompatible. Like I didn't really play many multiplayer games in Genesis, not four-way ones. I think the only one I did was Bomberman, but I didn't think that multi-tap would not work with EA games.
It it occurred to me while I was researching this one that I've never seen a multi-tap for the Genesis.
Yeah, I don't have no idea. I didn't know they existed. It's been a long
I didn't
time.
either. And so looking into the multi-tap, I came across the J cart.
All right, I'll pull that one up.
So the J cart is a fun one. And I'm guessing this was just to avoid the whole mess that was the Genesis multi-tap. Codemasters were like, "Hey, let's build a cartridge with 2 extra controller ports built into it."
Imagine that
Yeah.
decision. It's like, look, there's two multi-taps in the market. They're not getting along. I don't want to deal with this headache with our customers. Just put two ports in the cartridge itself. Just be done with it. Let's just do that. And just tell kids don't yank too hard on the cords because they'll pull the cartridge out. How
Right?
wild is
Like there were some games that I have where you can't touch them or the whole game freezes. You've got controllers hanging out of it. I don't
it's wild.
understand, like, these can't have aged that well, right?
So this is for Micro Machines 2, which I've never played it. I
Right.
famously played the
There were
first game
6 of
on
them.
multiple platforms, but this is a sequel.
So there were 6 J carts released.
Okay.
3 versions of Pete Sampras Tennis and 3 versions of Micro Machines.
Okay. Are they different games at least?
They are, yeah, it's
Okay.
not like the same game. It's like, there's Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament, which you have here. There was Micro
Yeah.
Machines 96, and then one other Micro Machines game. And then there were 3
Okay.
Pete Sampras tennis entries, and that was it. Those were the J cards.
Just wild. That kid who has to own 3 copies of Pete Sampras Tennis. He's just the Rabbit fan. Has to buy all 3. I didn't even realize there was that many Micro Machine games. It's wild. Like
Neither.
Codemasters was famous for their ports, right? Like Micro Machines is on everything, I think, at these points. But this is wild that
Yeah.
they shoved 2 ports on it. I think that's great. That's wild.
I mean, it's a pretty clever solution to a problem that was created by Sega and EA.
Yeah. Like
Codemasters was just like, no, 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 we're not going to deal with that.
like you would never see this on Super Nintendo, right? Like I would never see
No.
a Super Nintendo card. Nintendo would never allow it. First off, like there's no way. Like it would just violate
That
their code of building machine cartridges. Whereas this Sega, I
yeah.
guess, because of their battles with EA, just couldn't stop companies making their own carts.
Well, they actually struck a deal with EA to not sell that technology to other companies, and they let EA keep making their own cartridges for a very small licensing fee to Sega. So
Right.
they weren't getting their usual cut. They also weren't handling manufacturing. So they were
Right.
basically getting free money at that point.
Yeah.
So it was less than they should have gotten, but more than they deserved, I guess you could say.
Well, because EA
And
did
so
reverse
that's
engineering on the tech to do it, I think, right? So it was all there on their own.
correct.
Yeah. Okay. That's wild.
And then let's see, looking at my notes here. I guess now we can get to some of the various controllers.
Yeah. Here, let me start with
Well,
one, if you don't mind. I'm gonna pull one up
sure.
here. This thing.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna go actually. The
Oh, well, good.
Genesis
All
6
right.
button.
Because when I think of like, yeah, because like the Genesis controller, classically is the big round boomerang in your hands with 3 large buttons and that D-pad. I love the 3-button Genesis controller. It's one of my favorites. I bought a couple off eBay last year, and I love the one that has a metal ball bearing and the D-pad, which I think is fantastic. It's hold up and it aged very well for something that's like, what, 20 years old or more?
Oh, older than that.
Older, right?
The Genesis came out in '89, so the Genesis is
Yeah.
32 years old now.
So it's just
And
wild, and it feels so good in the hands. Like the buttons are large. It's great. I like it in a lot of ways more than the SNES controllers in some ways. And but there's a few games I rented, like Mortal Kombat. Well, I bought Mortal Kombat, but Street Fighter Championship Edition, which we all know Street Fighter needs 6 buttons. Genesis didn't have that, and the alternative was to hit start to switch between punches and kicks, which is a shit show. So
yeah,
I mean, at some point, Nintendo or Sega said, "Let's bring out a new controller." This thing, it's not bad, but I don't like how the top row of buttons, the XYZ, are smaller and they feel cheaper plastically to me. I don't know about you. They don't feel as nice as
yeah.
the
I
original.
always thought it was weird that they're smaller, but honestly, I don't know. Here's something that I'm curious about. Did other companies that made 6-button controllers decide that Sega's design was good, so they copied it? Or or what?
Um,
Because I have a third-party 6-button controller. I never had an official one, and its top row of buttons is also smaller and feel cheaper than the bottom row.
I don't get it. Maybe they just thought, like, for a lot of games, the top row would be less important to gameplay, I guess. I'm thinking like Contra Hardcore, I think uses them for weapon switching, which, granted, fine, I don't need a solid button for those. But I always looked at this as a fighting game controller, right? Playing Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, where
Yeah.
you want all 6 buttons to be good. I don't like how the top row is so chintzy. It's really bizarre. And no shoulder buttons like the SNES, I guess. Also, the D-pad is a bit different in this one. I don't know. It's not a bad controller. I just find it weird how it's quite a bit different than the 3-button controller. It doesn't feel like a step up to me. But this is kind of what they went with the Saturn. They went in this direction, right?
Yeah, this was very much the direction. In fact, I can pull a Saturn controller out and show you guys.
I know you love it. You can also buy these today. Retrobit makes, from all accounts, a pretty good clone of the Sega 6-button controller, and it's dirt cheap. And they have both original Genesis port ones, but also USB ones, and they're pretty solid controllers. So this is a neat controller you can buy even today in variations.
So this is the 6-button that I
Yeah.
have, which is it's by Performance, if you remember that brand at all. But yeah, you
No.
can see the top row of buttons is smaller.
Yeah.
And none of the buttons look particularly, and honestly, they all feel kind of cheap. But this controller has been solid. It works better than any of my official Sega controllers still. So
Really?
there's
Huh.
that. Yeah, for the Genesis. Now, for the Saturn, you can see the little buttons on top are still little,
Yeah.
but they don't feel cheap. Like the whole
Okay.
controller feels really solid. So you can see how they went from that little thing you got down there to this.
Yeah, the
It's
Saturn
got
controller is one of the ones that has a huge nostalgia. A lot of people love that controller quite a bit.
yeah, it's pretty comfy, and I know there was a redesign for the controllers, I believe there was a redesign for the controller. In fact, yeah, there was, because this is the original Saturn controller, and the later ones look like the 8-bit Do M30. They're more that shape.
Oh. Oh, like a bone-ish shape.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it?
more
Okay.
like a dog bone shape.
Yeah.
So it's a little more comfortable than the Boomerang.
Yeah. Yeah, actually the 8-bit Do version has the smaller buttons as well, if I'm not wrong. And that's actually not a bad controller. It is a good 8-bit Do controller, but
Mhm.
I never saw it. Like
So
there's a
it's
few companies that make 6-button controllers and they have 6 equal sized buttons. I want to say it's Hori's Commander ones, I think. I'm pretty sure it's Hori that makes them, and they're 6-button controllers. The ones they have out now are mechanical buttons, like mechanical switches, which is sounds
wow.
interesting. I kind of want to pick one up, but I can't use it. But I like the other 6 equal sized buttons on a controller. Seems interesting, and I don't know, but not a bad controller. And like honestly, for the 6 games you want to play with 6 buttons, this is the way to go, right? Like I could never play Mortal Kombat with the 3-button controller. It's not the same as playing with the 6.
Yeah. And honestly, as far as fighting games go, I always thought the 6 buttons laid out together worked better than
Yeah,
the Super Nintendo with the 4 buttons and L and R.
I never knew what L and R to push. Like which one was kick and which one was punch. It was always confusing to me. It
Um,
never felt right.
yeah, I would swap it usually
Yeah.
to what felt comfortable for me. But even Capcom realized that,
Yeah.
and they released a controller called the Capcom Pad Soldier, or based on the packaging, it was CP Soldier. And yeah, there it is.
Yeah. I remember you gave me the picture of this. This one is bizarre. Like, what? How do you
It
even
really
hold
is.
this? Do you hold it
You
like?
hold it like this, and then you have 3 fingers go over the buttons.
Oh, that's weird.
So it's for those listening and not watching, basically it looks like a sort of joystick in that you
Yeah.
only hold the controller with your left hand. And it's got a grip around the back. So the start and select buttons are above the D-pad. You got the D-pad accessible to your left hand thumb. And then you put your right hand's middle 3 fingers over the other 6 buttons like you would on the Genesis 6-button controller if you were playing a fighting game probably, and that's how you use it. So L and
Yeah.
R are just extensions past X and A.
Yeah. Which is the way to go, the way to do it. It just that grip is bizarre. Hold like the the left hand holds the weight of your fingers on the right side, which I guess is as close to an
But
arcade stick you're going to get at home, I guess, with this design. But it's very weird looking. I don't know. How does it
yeah,
play?
well,
Because you
what you're
own
not
one. How does it feel?
seeing,
Yeah.
it's really comfortable. What you're not seeing there is there's actually a slot for each finger to
Okay.
sit behind. So you can fit every finger comfortably, and each one has its own notch.
That's actually really good. That looks comfortable,
So
actually.
you have a great grip on this. If you're squeezing this, it's not going anywhere. Like
Yeah.
you've got a handle on this thing. It's a very comfortable controller. I used to have 2. I lent one to a friend. Never saw him again after that, unfortunately. But I bought 2, and they were like $9 on clearance at Electronics Boutique at the time or
Oh
something.
wow.
So I was like, these are cool controllers. I want them.
That's well. So I mean, as a kid, I was. I mean, I think we joked before in episodes about this, where you're visiting a friend's place and they would get the official controller, and the friend would get the shitty knockoff controller from Mad Catz or whatever. Like, so, and that goes back even to the SNES and Genesis era, where a lot of these third party controllers I didn't trust very much as a kid. I have one I can show. Hold on. Because I did use this one, which I think is hilarious. It's the Turbo Touch
Yeah,
360.
you showed me a picture of that. I had completely forgotten that thing existed.
Yeah, and like this thing is wild. So it's like there was a Genesis one and a SNES one, basically the same idea. The buttons are where you expect them to be, but there is turbo above them. But then the D-pad is removed and its place is a touch surface, like a hexagon surface, and it is definitely a touch controller. And I love it. If you look at the box for it, it says you'll love it or your money back. There's actually a money back guarantee. I wonder how many people actually tried to take them up on it. Because to
Oh
use
wow.
this, right, the idea is if you're playing Street Fighter and you're trying to do quarter circle forward on the touchpad, it should be nice and fluid. This thing is ass. It never did what you wanted to. I could never, just playing like Mario or Sonic with this damn controller, it just never felt right touching and not trying to tap it, clicking on a D-pad. Like tactile sensation in a D-pad is very important to me. That's why I like the Xbox One controller so much. It has a clicky D-pad, which nobody does these days. But this thing, there's no clicking, there's no pressing, just touching, and it feels awful, like just awful. But I don't know how many people like me went to a friend's place and got stuck with this controller while you get the floor mopped with you by your friend playing a standard controller. It's just weird. Such a
This
bizarre
feels
device.
like they took the idea of the NES Max, but instead of the little wheel that rolls around inside
Yeah,
there to go where you want it to, you have that.
just a touch surface.
Just the touch surface. And I would hate that.
Yeah. Ahead of its time,
Oh.
maybe in a way, because this is before touch screens and touchpads and laptops were such a huge thing. So maybe ahead of its
Mm.
time, but maybe they didn't have the technology back then. I just can't imagine today. Well, you know what? The PS4 or 5 has a touchpad on it. Excuse me. Is it the touchpad? Is it the PS5 that has that?
Yeah, the PS4 has it.
Yeah. So you know what? Maybe this set the
Might be
groundwork for the
controller handy,
PS4's
but
touchpad. You're welcome, Sony. we
I
did it.
believe the PS Vita had one on the back.
Oh yeah, I'd heard that.
So
Yeah.
Sony has made use of the touchpads.
Yeah. But yeah, I
I
can't
generally
imagine
don't
using
care
this.
for how they get implemented. Most games that I enjoy that use them just use it as another button. They
Yeah,
don't actually use the touch the actual pad part of it. They just use the button functionality. It's like another R3 or L3, you know?
Yeah, if you're building an arcade stick these days and it has PS4 support on the board, there's a wire you can control for a button, and it's literally just a touchpad button. I have no idea what fighting games use the damn thing for, but you can totally wire in a touchpad button on an arcade stick. It seems like such a wasted opportunity, honestly. So I don't know. TurboTouch 360. I don't. Yeah, I would almost want one just as a joke. I'm working on a display. I want to put a display together of all these old controllers, and there's a few on there that I want. I think this is one of the ones I would want as a joke to put up there. The other is the
I love that this
Coleco
thing is.
one. Mm-hmm.
I love that this thing is that bright yellow too. It's like safety yellow.
Well, the SNES one was an awful gray with a blue touchpad, I think. So just not winning any design awards at all. like at all.
I gotta look this up. SNES Turbo Touch 360. I gotta see this thing. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not great. And it looks, it's the same shape.
Yeah.
That's not Super Nintendo shape. That's horrible.
It has the shoulder buttons though, I think, doesn't it? Or does it have
It
6
does.
buttons on the front? Yeah.
It has the shoulder buttons and then the 4 on the face where they should be, but it's definitely a more Genesis shaped controller.
Yeah. It just screams knockoff. It's just like
Yeah.
your friend hands you this, you're like, well, I'm not going to win today.
And then apparently I'm seeing a version here that was yellow and red instead of the blue. So I don't know. Oh, that was for the NES. They put it on the NES as well?
Oh,
My
I did not know that. Wow. Wow.
And it's the same shape still.
What can make Mario that much harder? Let's make it touch controls. Let's just really screw with our audience. I can't imagine.
Gosh. This thing is, somebody was like, this is going to be great. And then it was not.
Revolutionary touch controls. I don't get it.
Wow. No,
Yeah,
I can't stand touch controls. I can't play games like most mobile games because they require touchscreen and
yeah.
like Genshin Impact. That's a great example. So I played Genshin Impact on my phone a little bit. I was terrible at it. And that's probably one of the best examples of touchscreen controls I've ever played. That was the least trouble I've had controlling a 3D game or a game that uses on-screen controls like that ever. And it still just paled in comparison to me being able to use a controller on the PC version. It was just no contest.
I've been playing a little bit of Monster Hunter Stories. The Android port got improved graphics over the 3DS version, so I'm playing on my phone anyway. And it's same thing, touch controls. It's playable, but using a D-pad virtually, like just with touch, sucks. I can't do it. Without some kind of tactile sensation, I just can't do it. I don't like it at all.
By the way, I want to mention that box, the box for the TurboTouch 360 said longer play or your money back. No need to push. So I'm guessing it was combating your thumb getting raw from all the
all that thumb fatigue, yeah. Right. I mean, if that's the case, it should have made touch buttons. I think maybe touch buttons might have been the better sell for this. I could see myself touching a touchpad for button presses, like especially like shootings, where you'd really tap in and going nuts. That seems to be better call for me, not the D-pad.
Yeah, it would have made more sense had they done like the Switch left Joy-Con or something.
Yeah. What a weird thing. All right.
And then I think I have. Speaking of fighting games, we were talking about with the CP Soldier and Sega 6 button. There's the Activator.
Oh yes. Have you ever had a chance to use this thing?
I have not. And
I'm curious.
Part of me is sad, and part of me is like, I probably didn't miss out on anything.
So the Activator is that hexagonal ring you put on your floor, and you stand in the middle of it, and then you kick or punch, and it registers at different inputs. I never quite understand how this would work, because I keep thinking the Power Glove and what a crap show that was to control things. In the picture I have on the screen here, it's a dude doing a crane kick, a la, Karate Kid. And it does not work that way. It's not at all. Like I always got the impression it was like the hokey pokey, right? You put your left foot in, you move to the right, put your right arm out, and you shake it all about, and you do punches. But like it just seems like what a weird device.
Well, the activator was also an official Sega thing, if I remember correctly.
It was, yeah.
And they actually got some high profile game the activator in mind for some of the development. So Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I believe, made use of it.
Oh
And
man, can you imagine playing a fighting game with this thing? There's no way.
well, that was the idea, is to play fighting games with this.
Oh, I couldn't do it.
That's how it was marketed.
Like I could see like the beat 'em ups maybe, or maybe a shooting game if you're just waving your arms around to go left and right and poking your foot out to shoot. I just don't understand how this would work well at all.
So, let's see. Yeah, activated games. While the activator will function with any Mega Drive title, a small number of games were partially designed for the activator and so specifically label themselves as activated. Best
Marketing,
of the
yeah.
Best Championship Karate, Eternal
Okay.
Champions, Greatest Heavyweights, Streets of Rage 3.
Okay, a boxing game, I could see that working okay. I could see that working pretty well, depending on how the zones are
Yeah.
set up for sensors.
In addition, Sega promoted support for Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter 2 Special Championship Edition, and Streets of Rage 2. Mega Drive and 32X versions of Mortal Kombat 2 also mention the activator by name, but the control scheme is identical to that of the standard 3-button controller. Thank you, Sega Retro, for that information.
That's bizarre. Yeah,
Yeah,
this
this thing
is
came out in 1993 and was $80.
that's
And
a lot
oh
of
my
money
god,
for the 80s. That's a lot of money.
apparently in the arcade, similar technology was used for Dragon Ball Z VRVS.
Okay. Does it
Hmm.
say what the controls are like? Like you're not actually
The
doing karate
activator,
moves in the circle.
the each section of the activator fires a beam of light upwards, and the player stands inside the octagon, punching and kicking to break the light beams and sending signals to the Mega Drive console in the process. So yeah, it's a glorified gamepad.
Yeah,
Um, where it makes use because it has 8 directions. So each direction is essentially a button: up, down, left, right, A, B, C, and start.
right.
So that's it. That's all it was.
So maybe you kick, it's a faster signal of returning back to the base, and it says a different button press. So I can see how you have the 4 cardinal directions, and then
Oh man,
punching for
can you
buttons.
imagine speed running? Like you hook this up to your PC and speed run Super Mario Brothers with the activator.
Anybody who speed runs like Sonic with this thing is a goddamn legendary hero. Right? Like, forget the steering
Oh
wheel
man,
percent. I want activator percent speed runs for games. This is wild.
that would be funny.
Like, is it the power pad? I've seen people. No, dance pad. People have done Dark Souls with the dance pad. This is like that, I think, which is
Yeah,
bizarre.
I've played some Symphony of the Night with the dance pad. It was not easy,
You know, as you
but
do,
I've done it.
play a classic game on a terrible ass controller on the mat on the floor.
Oh my gosh, the activator was jump into the action, it says, instead of welcome to the next level.
I want somebody to play Contra hardcore with this thing. That's what I want. I want to see
Oh
that.
no. That's a bad idea. Don't do it. You'll not make it.
That's wild.
I love it. Like this is I love how only 4 games were activated.
Well, that's the running theme with I think everything we've talked about today is a lot of these only had very limited number of games that worked with it, which is such a scam in a way, right? You're paying a lot of money for these devices.
Yeah.
$80 for the activator is not cheap for that era, and you can only use like
Mm-mm.
3 or 4 games with it properly, and the rest are kind of just half supported. That's not good.
I'm pretty sure official Super Nintendo controllers were like 25 bucks. Same for Genesis,
Yeah,
maybe
sounds about right.
30.
Yeah,
But
$80 for a hexagon or an
yeah,
octagon on floor.
this was not the era of $60 to $80 controllers by any
No,
means.
yeah, that's wild.
But I mean, the
I
Activator is probably like Sega's version of the Power Glove, right? It's similar technology, just presented in a different way.
Yeah, but I just wonder in the Sega boardroom. It's like, guys, Nintendo just killed it with the U-Force and the Power Glove back in the day. Let's do that again. It's been like 5-6 years. Let's do something. Let's do that better for the Genesis. And they come up with this idea. It's just wild. Like I look at this and I think of virtual reality today and all the accessories people try and make for virtual reality to try and bring in more immersive input. But like this is crazy. What a wild thing. The kid who had this, I feel bad for them. I wonder like what about it may have sold it to them. Like they want to go to their parents and say, "Hey, mommy, daddy, I want the activator."
Oh
I
man.
don't know. I have one more
Like,
accessory. I didn't mention to you
okay,
before. So whenever you're ready.
go ahead.
All right. So this is one I did have, and that's the Sega Channel, and this is
I
one of
was
the
actually
coolest
going to
ones.
mention something along the lines of this. So,
Okay, so I love the Sega Channel. So like this came out for me anyway. It came out in my area near the end of life of the Sega Genesis. I think 2 years before the PlayStation, or at least 2 years before my uncle bought a PlayStation. He picked this up from the cable company because when you rented a set top box, they were pitching the Sega Channel, and I got to use it for a good year. I don't remember what he paid for it, but I guess the idea is every month you got a slate of like a couple dozen games, and this would download it over your cable connection to the Sega Channel device, and then you can play it on your Genesis. Uh, it's wild because there's a lot of Sega games I never
so
would have given the time of day, like Humans or Theme Park, and I downloaded them from the device and played them, and it's fantastic.
did the cartridge wipe every time you turned off the Genesis and you'd have to download the game again, or did it maintain the game until you?
I think
How did that work?
I'm pretty sure it wipes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wipes. It didn't save it. I don't think it saved a game, or it might have saved a current game. No, I think it wiped it every time. And
So
it
you
took
had to
like a few
download the
minutes to
game every
download the
time.
games. Yeah, but it only took a few minutes to download a game. Like some games are worse than others. I think there was 1 month they had one unreleased helicopter game that was actually quite fancy in the graphics, and that one took a little bit longer to download onto the device. But it was a cable internet connection, so it was not slow. It was pretty good.
Hmm.
But I just remember for the design, like the character, the graphics was all really neat. I mean, you can get a Sega Channel ROM these days to check out the interface. Obviously, it will not work with games. But I mean, back in the
Yeah.
day, like this is revolutionary for me. Like the idea of access to games like a Netflix style before that was even a thing. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, that was I remember reading about that and thinking that was so cool and I was so interested, but I was one of those kids who never asked my parents for much because I mean they'd get me games all the time because my dad was always traveling and then he'd come home and bring some games home.
Yeah,
And then, it was what I was into. It was that and ride my bike around. Like those were my things. So I
yeah,
had a lot of video games. I didn't have a ton of other stuff like Legos and Connects and all that. My friends had a lot of those things. So this video games were my thing.
yeah,
So when it came to video games, I wanted as much bang for my buck as I could get from the
yeah,
game so that I wasn't asking for more stuff. So I didn't want to ask for a monthly subscription from my parents. I didn't do that.
yeah,
I was
and
one of those kids who rarely asked to go on the major field trips or anything because
yeah,
while they got me and my brother a lot of stuff, we were not well to do.
yeah. No, I totally hear you. No, and from my uncle, like I mean, he was a single dude, right? I used to chill at his place every other week, and yeah, like for him, his age, he was not married, didn't have kids of his own, no pets. Like his thing was just video games on the side, right? He was one of those guys. He used to work in construction as well, so he worked his ass off, and he used to play games when he was on his off weeks.
Hmm.
The Sega Channel to him appealed to him, I think, because I don't think it was that expensive, and you didn't have to buy the box. You rented it. It was part of the monthly fee, like the cable
Oh,
boxes
okay.
back at the time, right? So he was already renting a pay per view box or cable box, and he just got this add on. And like I said, it's wild what games you could play on it, and it was a way to play games without actually renting them because that's what we were doing. He was doing a lot as well, and so was I. We'd go to Blockbuster and rent games and bring them home for a couple of days. This is like renting, but a lot cheaper because there's a lot more games there that you could take advantage of, and it would change every month. Sometimes games would stay the same, but generally the games would shuffle pretty good each month. Like at least remember it being pretty good. And like Toe Jam and Earl is how I played on this Panic on Funkatron. I never would have played that. Never would have even given the time of day. Played it on the Sega Channel. Theme Park, which I love as a series. My first exposure was this version on the Sega Channel. Obviously not as great as the PC version, but
Did you get to play Mega Man back then?
Yeah, I did. So there's some exclusives I got to play. So Mega Man: The Wily Wars was on this exclusively. I'm pretty sure. I don't think that came out on cartridge over here, and
then
it
there
was
was that
bad.
other game, right?
My favorite game, yeah, I love talking about that on the podcast. Pulse Man.
There it is.
Pulse Man's a fantastic Genesis game that never came here, and it drives me nuts that it never did. It's a fantastic platformer, and our
That's a
only chance
bummer
to play
that
it.
was a Sega
Mhm.
Channel only.
It's weird, right? Like the only way we got to play it was Sega Channel, and then later on the Virtual Console on the Wii got a copy. But I mean, for a completely done game that requires like no translation, it was effectively done. All they had to do was manufacture it and release it here, and they never did, and that's a shame. But it plays excellently on this device, and it again, Sega Channel. So between that and Why the Wars was also tripped because I did love Mega Man, but I never owned any of them. I think except for 3. And I mean, that was Nintendo era. So this one, they had upgraded graphics, which is interesting at the time. And you had like all 6 Mega Man games on it, I think it was. It was definitely a bunch. Really cool stuff. Sega Channel's an awesome device. And it's something that you can't use it today. It doesn't exist today. It's just a piece of history. So I'm glad I got to experience it for a little bit. But such a weird
Yeah.
thing.
Well, what Nintendo had two things kind of like this that they never that never left Japan. So there
Yes.
was the Satellaview, which
Yep.
is probably more in line with what this is, what Sega Channel is, where you could do stuff through a sort of connected service, right? And
Yeah, the
there were a few
Satellaview was
games that
an
made use
actual
of it.
satellite TV service, right? And it's you didn't download games from it. From my understanding, it was a broadcast schedule, and you could only play the games when it was that time slot, which is the
Yeah.
weird thing. So when you had like Legend of Zelda Stone Tablets, which one of our early episodes is on, you could only play that game a specific time each week. They had 2 broadcasts, I think, a week where you had a chance to play it, and you could only play it for a limited window. That's why that ROM was famous because there's a clock in it, and you can only play it for an hour, I think it is. And different events would occur different times as the game was broadcast. It's a very bizarre, bizarre setup.
They were treating it as sort of like a TV series in that way,
Yes,
right?
yeah, like 4 episodes of Nintendo Stone tablets, and each week was different, and then you could carry your progress between week to week in a way. Really
Huh.
cool, neat tech. The idea of being able to play a game only once or twice if you're lucky during a week of a broadcast, and then once it's over, it's over. That's very bizarre to me. And they
Yeah,
did a
that's
few of that,
wild.
right? Yeah. And like I mean,
But
today
then
days you can still play it. Like there's people who've hacked it with community ROMs and have done their own translated voiceovers and the whole 9 yards. Like it's really cool tech because it's satellite. You had audio, you had CD quality music over top of this. So Sega Channel didn't have any of that. Sega Channel was literally just the games. So Teleview was a lot more added on top.
well, the other thing that was kind of like the Sega Channel was again, Japan only, the Nintendo Power kiosks and flash cartridges.
Yep.
So over here we think of Nintendo Power as magazine. In Japan, Nintendo Power was a flash cartridge service where you could take your cartridge into the store, and they had it for both Super Nintendo and later Game Boy. It started in 96 for Super Nintendo, started in 2000 for Game Boy, and the service lasted until 2007. So this service lasted 11 years.
That's a long ass time. Yeah.
And right, and the fact that it started for Game Boy 11 years after Game Boy came out.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it was a thing for the Game Boy. That's
That's pretty
wild.
wild.
Yeah,
But yeah,
because yeah,
it was just you had a flash cartridge, you'd take it to the kiosk and say, I want to get this game. And so you'd get the game for way lower prices than what the full release was because it was a flash cartridge. They didn't have to sell you the box, they didn't have to ship it or anything like that. So
yeah.
there's that. And you'd download your whatever games were available at the time onto your cartridge and then you could play them.
It's weird because like in my teens, I guess I used to see ads for third-party flash carts, right? We're famous for piracy back in the day. I always wonder where that tech came from. Like, how the hell how they come up with that idea of flashcards where you can download stuff? And it comes from Japan, really. It's just bootleg versions of the official flashcards that you used to use in stores, kiosks. But in this, you can put anything you want on it. It's just wild tech.
So I thought that was kind of neat. Both of those things are slightly tangential to Sega Channel, but Nintendo never bothered bringing them to North America. They just left them in Japan. Whereas Sega was like, you know what, we could do this.
It's got to be somebody who'll pay for it. Go ahead.
To be fair, they thought that of a lot of things, but some of those things they actually made work, and that's the sweet spot for Sega is when they got something right.
Yeah, like when it comes to like the merging of TV with games, like the idea of like the game console being central to home entertainment. This is Sega Channel's like is an early try at that, I guess, over here in North America. We don't quite have this again until Xbox 360, maybe Xbox One, I guess, where they tried tying in like the cable stuff to the Xbox One, but I mean that famously died really early. You don't really see it nowadays. Like, I mean, for the Wii and the Wii U, Netflix app, right, bringing video to your console was a thing. But nowadays, the Switch is famous for not having a Netflix app. They don't bother. So it's just like every few years, video games tries to intersect with home media and TV watching and try and bring the things together. Like I still remember the Wii U having the TV thing on it, the TV remote control, right? Which is funny.
Yeah, well, these days, I mean, they've kind of nailed how that works to a degree. You've got Xbox Game Pass, you've got the NES and Super NES collection on the Switch, and apparently soon to be Game Boy. So
we'll see.
they're figuring this stuff out slower than we'd like, but they're finally getting to the point again to where they're making these sorts of things a reality, where Sega was doing it almost 30 years ago.
Yeah, actually, that's a good analog for it. Like the idea that Sega Channel was basically having a games on demand service 30 years before the Nintendo Switch had it, right? Where it's just wild.
Yeah. Sega, it's another example of Sega being way ahead of their time.
Yeah, totally.
To their detriment.
Somebody's got to make these innovations. Somebody.
Yeah.
That's wild. All right. Wow, we're at almost an hour and a half, dude.
I see that. I think we've talked about everything except the Super Game Boy and the Game Boy for or not the Super Game Boy, the Game Genie for Genesis and SNES. But I don't think there's too much we can say. People kind of know what those are. If you don't, it's the Game Shark of its time.
Well, I mean, it's before there's Game Shark. There's the Game Genie, and
exactly.
yeah, I mean, my experience was the Nintendo version of the Game Genie. I never really owned this, but the tech was always cool to me. So that's neat they continued it. But that's wild, Game Genie.
Yes.
All right.
Those were fun to play with. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And where can they find you, Jake?
Yeah, I'm Sick Jake. You can find me on Twitch sometimes. I swear I'll do more. I'll stream again one day. Actually, my dream, I think I'm going to do in the next few months, is I'm going to start streaming games where I only get one shot to play through a game. And then after I hit the game over screen, I just quit the stream. So if it's like Contra Hardcore and I die in 10 minutes, stream's over.
That's that.
That's done. I think I'm going to do that
in the
near future. And then just have like a 30-minute starting soon screen. Just to really cement it in. That's what I'm going to do. This is the bullshit I come up with for Twitch. But otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at SickJake, SSEJAKE. How about you?
You can find me on Twitch and Twitter, WAREWULFF. Or search it on Google, tell it you meant it. You'll find me.
Awesome. And of course, you can find Press Me to Cancel on all your favorite podcast apps from Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher. I have a bunch of them. And we're also doing YouTube as for people walking. We're trying our best to not. We're trying to make sure we talk about audio things, not just referring to the video we see in front of us. But if you are more of a visual person, then feel free to check us out on YouTube. I have not decided on when to push videos to YouTube after the audio recording because it does take sometimes a little bit more work to do. I'm thinking maybe Sundays drop the YouTube version of an episode, but we'll figure it out. If there's a certain day you guys prefer for the video, whether it's the same day or later on, let us know. Definitely feedback is important for the YouTube as it's brand new to us. But so far, it's been fun to do, and it seems to be working okay. So if there's if this type of thing you like, please let us know on our Discord or on Twitter. Otherwise, we are an audio podcast as well, and we're always going to be there as well. So, all right, folks. Thanks very much, and we'll see you all next week. Oh, I screwed that one up.
That's okay. Activated.
There we go. We'll fix it in post.